Welcome to this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through their industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have Edward Rahill. He is an entrepreneur, author, endurance road race record holder. Welcome to the show, Edward.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Matter of fact, it's an honor.
You are.
I want to thank you. Yes, I'm Edward Rahill. I've written a book called 1 Mile at a Time. And that book is really basically what I think is the impetus for this podcast, because it's really a story that I needed to tell. And for your audience, I'll frame out the part of the punchline of why I did it, and then we can talk about details and you can question me. Basically, this book started out as a letter to my children, and it was because, well, one of the things that had happened to me, I had realized because of my career, as we ended up becoming CEO of a company, is that my kids really knew nothing about me prior to my meeting their mother, and I felt it was important to establish in their lives a foundation of where they came from and the generations prior to their existence that allowed me to be the success, enabled me to be the success I became, and is allowing them to follow that same path. That concept of connection is underlying all aspects of this book.
Right.
Okay. So it's important. The second thing, though, the reason that I'm getting most of my positive reviews does have a lot to do with the racing. And it's really kind of understanding American history. Anybody and this is for Americans, not just people international. This book is a roadmap of how America kind of became what it was in the 20th century and reached the pinnacle, because it was an attitude of the individual person in America that they were responsible for themselves and they could make anything happen. And so that's a context. The original racing concept is about adventure and independence. The races I'm talking about are cross-continental races, long-distance endurance races, 3,000 miles or more. And it started in the 18th century in North America with the Pony Express, which was a news service, not a racing service, but it was an attempt to cross the United States as fast as you could. And that concept started in 1860. After the American Civil War, there were a series of expansion in the West, and the concept of endurance racing, meaning 1,000 miles on horseback or more, became part of the culture. It reached its pinnacle in the United States in 1893 with what's called the Great Cowboy Race of 1893, in which it was a race 1,000 miles to the city of Chicago, where the World Fair was being held, and a character named Buffalo Bill Cody was going to award a gold-plated Colt 45 pistol to the winner, and that did occur. That really kind of ended, though, the concept of cross-continental horseback racing, because the world had changed. Trains, railroads, barbed wire had really changed what the cowboy was as being truly independent. It became a section of society rather than somebody who roamed his life looking for work. However, that didn't change the concept of racing, because in 1905, the first cross-continental road race in America occurred from New York to Portland, Oregon. And if those of you who have a chance to read my book, you'll see my foreword. I talk about that. And I'm standing in front of a monument that the state of Oregon erected to those two men who won that race as the first cross-continental road race. And the unique thing for me in the context is that, as you find out from the book, they were the first ever to win one. And I'm the last one to ever win a cross-continental road race. My race was from Boston, Massachusetts to San Diego, California, and completed that race in a little over 35 hours. So that's the adventure part of it. It's what people enjoy, because I go into as much detail as I can to explain the experiences during that period of running across country, the highs, the lows, the emotional problems you have, the the breakdowns, the arrests, all that, and how it taxes you to whether you really want to go on. 30 people started out that race in Boston. Only 11 of us finished because of either, for one reason or another. And in the story, the unique part of this is that, we had been arrested twice, once in New York State, once in Ohio. Very interesting, funny stories. And then we finally broke down in Illinois, and we had given up. And the book kind of outlines what happened to me, as I reflected on the fact that I was going to be a failure on this race. And I had emotional reconnection with my youth and my grandmother who raised me, and she had prepared me for many trials and tribulations and never understood why she did that. And that kind of inspired me to go on. And I no longer was looking at winning the race. I was looking at as finishing it the best way I could against the fact that we were last place so far behind. And that's where the 1 mile at a time came. That is the approach I took. I had 2,000 miles to go to San Diego. No hope of winning it, I thought. And it was 1 mile at a time. I kept on telling myself, going to take it one car, 1 mile at a time. And that is exactly what happened. And in the outcome of the book, you'll see kind of really, I was shocked when I got there and found out that we had won that race by 10 minutes. And it's a story. For those who enjoy racing, I get into the details of how you handle a car, what happens to a car at different speeds, how you approach braking and turning. One reader said he actually felt now he learned how to drive a race car. And so there's a little bit of that in there. But that is basically the racing component. But the sublining component is I only was able to accomplish what I did because the people who came before me passed on their knowledge and wisdom.
Right, right, Edward. So I want to understand from you about the race that you won. How did it shape your later part of life? What is it that you learned out of it? What is it that you want others to learn out of that?
Okay. To answer that question, the interesting thing was it reminded me that I was a very capable person. I had a strong will. And I'm going to answer your question in a unique way. At the finish line, I was being interviewed by one of the local San Diego TV stations. And I remember the reporter saying to me, "So now that you set a record, are you planning on doing any more, perhaps Europe or Baja?" And I remember standing in front of her, reflecting on what she just said. And I looked at her, I said, "I don't want to be remembered for this is the greatest thing I did in my life." It was a challenge, a personal tie to my youth around cars and racing and the experiences that I had growing up. But it was not my life. It was a step in my life. And I actually graduated from racing, focusing in on the business environment. Had a couple of really good breaks. One of them was being assigned to a task force in Mexico by my company in the State Department to help figure out how to keep Latin America from going bankrupt. And that launched my career on the business side. I went from a financial analyst working for Atlantic Richfield. 1 year, 18 months later, I was 32 years old, vice president officer of the Bell and Howell Company. And that catapulted my career. And I learned about taking chances in business as well as with racing. If the only reason you're not going to do it is because you're afraid, that's not an excuse not to do it. And the people have to understand the difference between taking risks and calculated risk taking. You need to take a look at life. If you don't take some chances and change what you're doing at the moment, you're going to stay where you are, and you're not going to grow. And the worst thing that can happen to you is that you took a chance, it didn't work out. Well, how does that? At the end of the day, it's a disappointment more than it is a real problem for me. You just pick up the pieces and go on. And that whole concept comes out of the generations before me. I was raised by my grandmother. Her mother came over from Ireland in the late 1800s at 14 years old. Um, Ended up being a maid at Delaware Avenue in Buffalo, New York, for life. And she, got married and had several children. One, which is my grandmother, Ann Cottrell. And Ann, it was a tough life they had. They lived in South Buffalo. She had to leave school in the 5th grade to help support the family, and her job was to walk the railroad tracks at the rail yard to pick up coal to sell. And then she said that back then that was a good job. And from that perspective, she had learned about coming up and building upon generations. She got lucky and married my grandfather, who was a bright entrepreneur, convinced the Ford Motor Company in the early 1930s to grant him a dealership license in Western New York, and he started it up. So she had 4 children, 5th-grade education, stay-at-home mom. Life was everything she dreamed of. But 2 years later, her husband died of appendicitis. And so she was stuck with 4 children, no means of income or support. Ford Motor Company had sent one of their district managers out to inform her that they're taking the dealership away from her and giving it to a man who knows how to run it. And she basically said her faith kept her hanging in. And the end of the story, what you'll see in the book, I have a copy of the telegram that Ford Motors sent to her 18 months later, congratulating her on her performance, copying all the other dealers in New York and saying, and basically, I swear to God, you'll love it when you read it. What we need to do is find some more single mothers with 4 kids to run these dealerships, because she's basically showing you how to do it. And it was how she came through that and survived and became a success. For me, she wanted to transport that gift to me of how she did it, what she went through, the terror of being alone, not knowing how we're going to survive another day, and how she got it. And that was something that changed my life at critical components. It changed during the race, changes in my career. I've faced, unbeatable odds for my entire life, and we're able to pull it off. And I think it's not me that's special. It's part of what she passed on to me that gave me the gift to be able to have the courage and the insight and the confidence to go on. And what I'm trying to say to my generation in the future, you need to look at your life as a relay race, like in the Olympics. There's a runner before you that ran his or her life as hard as they could, and they did the best they can, but they came towards the end of their leg, and their job was to hand the baton of wisdom and experience off to that next runner, who then lives his or her life as best they can. Really, that's important. You live it as best you can and improve. But somewhere towards the latter half of your life, you need to start thinking about, how am I going to help my progeny and future generations benefit from what I learned, the good and the bad, the mistakes and the rewards. And that's really the theme of the book, is that it is. And in very many ways, those of your viewers who maybe would like to understand a little bit more about American culture, it's a model of what got America to what it was. It was not a government. It was individual people all having that attitude of being an immigrant into the country and coming in and just trying to make the best of it for their children, not for them. My great grandmother wasn't concerned about her life. She was concerned about my grandmother's life. She was going to grow up and be happy. And that type of resulted in taking the country from a backwater, wild cowboy country to a world leader. And the way you grow is you grow through the building up, allowing the individuals to grow. Centralized growth is not going to get you where you need. It can hold you where you're at, but it's the individuals. And I'll just use one quick analogy, if I may. One of the most prominent immigrants into the United States was Elon Musk. Yeah, and he was a nobody, and now look at what he's made a career out of himself. That's the kind of attitude that made America great, and I also think it's the kind of attitude the world can take, because every nation has that in them. Every human being has that. If we can just unleash that willingness to take a chance, take a risk, and then if you are successful, help your next generation understand and how to work. I think we have a better world. That's kind of where the book comes from.
Right, Edward. Right. So, talking of, learning from your grandmother, in 15 months she could perform about some things that she did not know much about. And in your case, you learned about fortitude at Notre Dame and so many things, on the racetrack, everything. Why is it that leaders nowadays face challenges? Someone who does not have too much of education can perform, and here in today's time, leaders with so many fancy degrees, MBAs, and whatnot from all the big names, big institutions, a crisis comes and everything falls apart. What do you think is the problem here? What do they think they should be doing?
I believe the answer to your question. I believe that we have confused the purpose of our higher education systems. I do a whole section on Notre Dame because for me, I chose that, over Harvard because the school was basically still had a traditional classic approach. Spent a lot of time on philosophy and meaning for life and what it means to be a human being, as opposed to a stepping stone to become to join the State Department when I graduated. And in a sense, the academic institutions in the United States, I'm concerned to become more concerned about conveying the technical knowledge of how the system works, as opposed to looking at the foundations of the man and woman they're building, what kind of person they come. I would really like to see, my education system in this country changed to what used to be called the Renaissance man. As you come up from the lower levels of education, but you learn about everything. You learn about the human factors, the philosophies, all of them around the world, because every one of them has a tremendous thing to offer, and that you don't really get into your technical degree capability until you get to maybe graduate school. You should walk out of college as a human being that's well versed and understanding your role in the world and where you are and everything that came before you. There's tremendous knowledge out there that the ancients have that can benefit us today. And I've been always fascinated by reading some of the Stoic philosophy out there because it really, you're talking 2,000 years old, but my Lord, it really drives home. Human beings have not changed that much in 2,000 years. They have tremendous wisdom. So I guess what I'm concerned, we're training people to be technocrats and excellent technocrats. We're not teaching them to be people who can advance the future of the human race. We're teaching them how to operate the bureaucracy that exists. And that is not mission that I think we should have for the human race.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I want to understand. That's where I asked, what can leaders do? Nowadays, everybody wants to be, productive. And there is this whole lot of talk about, imposter syndrome, then work-life balance. You want people to have a productive life. What is your take on work-life balance? Is it one should focus on productivity or one should focus on work-life balance? How should leaders look at it?
I love that question. I just had a very close relative of mine pass away, and I went to this weekend. I'm not in my office because of that. But I think the answer, as I reflected on his life and mine, we need to get up in the morning and realize that you've been given a gift of one more day, okay? And you have a choice. And as my grandmother, in my book, I have a book of quotes. Okay. And modeled from my grandmother. I remember being 8 years old, standing in the kitchen. She pointed her finger at me and says, "You have a choice when you grow up. You can let the world happen to you, or you can happen to the world. Your choice." And I think if we all need our breaks, our rebuilding, recharging, and moments to ourselves in the solitude and spending time with friends and living for the moment. But the point is that we have to understand that you've been given a gift to be here with the knowledge. I mean, the fact that you have this podcast is just incredible, and you have so much to offer people. And I think that's the point that I'm driving at, is that and I don't always do this. I wake up in a bad mood in the morning, and I'm not productive. But I try to remind myself that I'm here. I actually have a mission to make the world a better place because I was here. That was finally my grandmother she would. I remember another time she said to me, and this is why you're going to love her in the book. She said to me, at the end of your life, you lived a good life if you can honestly say the world is a better place because you were here. And she says you don't have to change the world, you just need to make it better. And she said sometimes you make it better of one person at a time. And I think that's when you become very sad. You feel good about yourself because you lived a good life. And I think that's the point. The thing that I've learned about life balance, if I was to, and my grandmother said one other point, she wished she had 2 lives to live. The first one to learn from, the second one to live. And if I could go back into a second life, I would definitely spend more time with my kids in the early years, basically to make sure that I am fulfilling that concept of passing it on. That is something I know I'd want to do. And so I think that's the work-life balance. You make sure you stay connected with those you love, and that turns friends too. And then but basically you need to get up most of the time and say, there's one more moment, that I'm here one more day. Let's see what I can do with it.
Absolutely, absolutely. What about giving back? A lot of leaders are talking only about, taking for themselves, taking it for the founders, taking it for the stakeholders, and the stakeholders and all the promoters holding 90% of the company's stock and forgetting about the customer and forgetting about the all the people, everything. We have forgotten about the planet itself, and that is where about we are not giving back it to the planet, those people who are earning out of it. What is your take on this giving back?
First of all, fantastic, great companies. It's not the fact that they're a corporation and whether the economic system's the right one. It's all about the people who are in it. The way the companies behave is a reflection on society today, and how these people value things and how they were educated and what they look at. Very, very often, it's also a product of the fact that a lot of senior management in a lot of corporations in the West are brought up like we discussed with education. They're technocrats. Okay, I have a degree, master's degree in economics, an MBA in finance, and I totally understand. I've been CFO, taking companies public, start companies, CEO, and with a business I started 6 years ago, I ended up selling for $1 billion. I understand how to technically execute, but it's the reason why you're executing. Is it because you really just want to be able to say, I got the best ROI in my industry, or is the world a better place because I was here? And I think we need to understand, part in my learning about life and teaching people is that you don't give people free handouts. You teach them, okay, that there's another grandmother quote. You give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. You teach a man to fish, you feed him for his life. And I think that we need to look in society, our compassion, if we really love human beings that are not, that are downtrodden and need to be helped, you teaching them how to lift themselves gives the greatest gift you could ever get somebody who's in treatment. because they like themselves anymore. I mean, if they're constantly being taken care of by a government or people, they never feel like complete human beings. They never feel that I'm good. I've done this. But so I think when we talk about doing public good, we should do that. But look, how do we help that human being? Not to just feed them for a day, but to feed them for the rest of it. And I use that analogy to say that a lot of the corporate goals are basically looking at, are basically doing symbolic things because they think it's called virtue signaling. They aren't we great? Look what we're doing. But they maybe really aren't. And it goes back to what you and I were just talking about, is I think that our leaders today in the education system are being traded how to be good operators, not how to be good strategic thinkers.
Absolutely, absolutely. There's much to learn about all these things, for a lot of people out there in the business side from you. But talking about your book, you said that you wanted to leave some sort of, understanding about your earlier life for your children and all. But who is this basically your book for? 1 mile at a time.
Um, as I said, I started out with a letter to my children, and I had a couple of good friends that I asked them to read it because I had discovered at that time, or I became aware that the values I just talked about passing on the batons, I hadn't been focusing on. I hadn't prepared them, and I wanted to start the process with a book. It was then that a very good friend of mine, who's a well-known human psychologist, said, he said, Ed, this is a manuscript. He says, this is a lesson for all of us. He said, and he knowing about my life, he says, do you realize all these things you've done? And I said, I started thinking about it. He said, do you ever talk to your kids about what you did in Mexico? You ever talk to your kids about the race you won? And I never did, because I basically wasn't thinking the way I should be thinking. I want to capture the good and the bad of my life and help them understand what worked and what didn't. And so the book is really, it's a true story. It's as factual as I can. In the back of the book, there's 72 separate news organizations, AP, UPI, and papers around the country and the world that covered this story. And so it's all documented. And so it's all there, but I just never, I would just shed that experience and then move on. I never lived in the past, but the past has got lessons, and what the book is trying to teach it, not just to my kids, but also I want to teach it to Americans. I use the race as kind of a metaphor for life. The fact that we won that race is nothing short of incredible. I mean, I basically averaged from Illinois to San Diego, including stops and construction, 104 miles an hour. And this is a different time. Some people are going to be upset about that, but remember, this is the last race of an American heritage that had gone on since the 1860s. And it was a time when America still had an adventuresome spirit, and Americans did. I mean, NBC Nightly News covered it and did 6 minutes on their nightly broadcast and only had 22 minutes of news. They actually sent people along to ride in the cars and sent out helicopters. There was a national all points bulletin on this race. When I got arrested in Ohio, it was I was driving about 120 trying to pick up Stein, and all of a sudden radar went on. So my partner Tim hit the radar jamming equipment, which you'll explain that in the book. And the patrol car came right around. So I had a rule: you never try to run the cops. And so what we did is I pulled over and waited for him to catch up. And I'm sitting there with my license and registration like this, so he can see my hands. And he says, "No, Mr. Rahill." He says, "I'd like you to come back to my car." And I'm saying, "How did he know my name?" And he got in his car. His name was Sergeant Roger Teague of the Ohio State Police. And he says, "There's an APB out here. I know who you were before you even showed up." And he says, by the way, this is my day off. I volunteered to do this thing. And he said, it's funny thing, Ed. He says, when I hit you with my radar, it says you're doing 56 miles an hour, but I've been doing this for 15 years. If you're moving, you're doing 120. He says, well, I was trying to figure out how I could get you a ticket. And he said, then I noticed you pulled off the road without using your turn signal. So he got me for changing lanes without turns. And he said, this is like the game Monopoly. This is a race that I volunteered for because I love doing these. And he said, you're going to lose one turn. That's 30 minutes. Sit in my car, then I'll let you go. And don't speed my zone. I'll come back after you. And that was his thing. Why is this relevant in the book? Because at the end of the day, we had an awards and invited everybody who was associated with. And he showed up with his wife to collect the trophy of Super Trooper Award for the four-ball rally. He showed up. But that was a time when even the police they used human judgment. Am I dealing with something that is terribly horrible and violating people's rights or not? And he made a judgment call just to let me go. Today, with our society, I don't know where it is around the world, but it's so autocratic that the police no longer have the option to be human beings when they pull you. Sometimes they do, depending on jurisdiction, but they got to write the ticket. This is why in the United States, the joke is that every time you get pulled over by police, the first thing he asks, do you know why he pulled you over? He's doing that to try to doing an investigation to see if there's anything he can get you. And it's not because he's the bad guy, but that's the way the system works. So I'm saying it's a time when America was different, where the individual spirit was different, and the attitude of the public. I mean, the fact that I'm in the New York Times. I got a half page in the Chicago Sun-Times on the article, and people really just excited. For months, I had to go around and give talks. That was a culture because people really enjoyed the concept of breaking free and being a free spirit. That has changed in America, and I think it's changing in the world. And I'd like to see a little bit of come back, not to violate rights, but or do something stupid, but have an attitude. I don't have to do it the way it's done.
Absolutely. There is much to learn about all these things from you, and there is so much to learn from your book, 1 Mile at a Time. So for those people who want to learn more about you, from your book, 1 Mile, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
Thank you. EdwardRahill.com is my website. Author Edward Rahill on Facebook and Instagram. And the book is available on Amazon 1 mile at a time. My hope, and I'm going to be engaging some added professionals to help me market it. My goal next year is to get it to be setting it up to become a movie. And so one of my goals is to try to get the volume up of the book so that I have a better chance of getting it. The attorney when I started the book, the word got out I was doing it. A couple of producers from Hollywood wanted to come out and talk to me, fly to Atlanta. And my attorney said, don't you dare. He says, right now, all they want the title, because Ford versus Ferrari had just come out, so the racing was a real thing. They want the title, and they want your name to say based on a true story, and they're going to write it the way they want. It says, but if you get it published, get it copyrighted, and you start getting sales, you can walk in and say, no, I'm selling the book, not the concept. And that's important to me because I'm worried that if I don't keep that structure in place, they're going to miss the underlying theme about life is a relay race, and it's generations before us that helped us be who we are, and the future depends on us handing on that knowledge to our next generation. The future of the human race depends on how we handle the next generation. And I want that to be part of the theme. So I have to be very diligent in getting negotiating power by selling books.
Absolutely. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining
Thank
us.
you.